Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. In today's video, we're going to take a deep dive into the top 10 poorest countries in the world in 2025. Despite the global progress we've seen in many parts of the world, there are still nations facing severe economic challenges, struggling with poverty, instability, and limited access to resources. From conflict zones to regions plagued by natural disasters, these countries are facing some of the most difficult circumstances. But what's causing these nations to stay at the bottom of the economic ladder, and how can the world help? Stick around as we explore the reasons behind their struggles and look at what's being done to address these challenges. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more insightful content. Let's get started. 10. Yemen. Yemen, located on the Arabian Peninsula, has been devastated by years of war and political unrest. Since 2015, the country has been embroiled in a brutal civil war between the Houthi rebels and the government, backed by a Saudi-led coalition. This ongoing conflict has crippled Yemen's economy, destroyed infrastructure, and caused widespread displacement. Yemen was already one of the poorest countries in the Arab world before the war, with a large proportion of its population living in poverty. The conflict has led to severe food shortages, widespread malnutrition, and a breakdown of healthcare services. The country's reliance on imports for food and fuel has exacerbated the crisis. Yemen is facing the world's worst humanitarian disaster, with millions dependent on international aid for survival. 9. Madagascar. Madagascar, the world's fourth-largest island, is home to a unique ecosystem and rich biodiversity, yet it faces significant economic challenges. The majority of its population relies on agriculture, but this sector faces numerous issues, including soil erosion, deforestation, and vulnerability to natural disasters like cyclones and droughts. Madagascar has experienced political instability and governance challenges, which have hindered the country's development. Despite efforts to expand its infrastructure and improve education and healthcare, the country remains among the poorest globally. Access to basic services such as clean water, electricity, and sanitation is limited, and malnutrition and disease are widespread. Madagascar's reliance on agriculture, coupled with the challenges of climate change and political instability, means that economic growth remains slow and uneven. 8. Liberia. Liberia, located in West Africa, was founded by freed American slaves in the 19th century, yet the country has faced a long history of conflict and instability. A brutal civil war from 1989 to 2003 devastated the country's infrastructure, resulting in widespread poverty and the displacement of millions of people. Despite its rich natural resources, including rubber, timber, and diamonds, Liberia's economy has remained underdeveloped due to a combination of political instability, corruption, and mismanagement. The majority of the population relies on subsistence agriculture, and the country struggles with high unemployment rates. Healthcare services are limited, and the country is vulnerable to disease outbreaks such as Ebola, which struck Liberia particularly hard in 2014. While Liberia has made progress in rebuilding since the end of the Civil War, poverty and inequality remain deeply entrenched. 7. Malawi. Malawi, often referred to as the warm heart of Africa, is a landlocked country in southeastern Africa. The nation is heavily dependent on agriculture, with tobacco, tea, and sugar being key exports. However, most of the population lives in poverty, relying on subsistence farming, which is highly vulnerable to erratic weather patterns, such as droughts and floods. Malawi has faced periods of food insecurity, particularly in rural areas. A history of political instability, weak governance, and poor infrastructure development has impeded progress. While the country has made some strides in education and health, its healthcare system remains underfunded, and disease outbreaks such as cholera and malaria continue to affect many. With a population growth rate that outpaces economic development, Malawi faces significant challenges in achieving sustainable growth. 6. Niger. Niger, located in the Sahel region of West Africa, is one of the poorest and most arid countries in the world. Despite its uranium resources, Niger struggles with extreme poverty due to harsh environmental conditions and political instability. Over 80% of the population lives in rural areas, and agriculture is the main livelihood, but this sector is vulnerable to erratic rainfall, desertification, and crop failures. Rapid population growth puts further strain on limited resources. Niger's government struggles to provide basic services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The country faces one of the highest maternal and child mortality rates globally, while malnutrition and food insecurity are widespread. Additionally, Niger's economy is highly dependent on external aid and remittances, and the government lacks the capacity to address the country's numerous challenges effectively. 5. Mozambique. Mozambique is a country located in southeastern Africa, which has made some economic strides in recent years, particularly with the discovery of large natural gas reserves. However, these resources have not been enough to pull the majority of its population out of poverty. Mozambique was severely affected by a civil war that lasted from 1977 to 1992, which devastated the country's infrastructure and economy. Although peace was restored, the country still faces significant challenges such as corruption, political instability, and a reliance on subsistence agriculture. Natural disasters like cyclones, floods, and droughts frequently disrupt agriculture, a key sector that employs a large portion of the population. While Mozambique's growing natural gas sector holds promise, the benefits have not been evenly distributed, and much of the population continues to live in poverty. Healthcare and education systems remain underdeveloped, with high rates of malnutrition, malaria, and other preventable diseases. The rural poor are particularly vulnerable, and although there has been economic growth in recent years, inequality remains pervasive. 4. Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, is one of the most resource-rich countries in the world, with vast deposits of cobalt, copper, diamonds, and other minerals. Despite this wealth, the DRC remains one of the poorest countries, with its vast resources failing to translate into widespread prosperity. The country has been plagued by decades of conflict, political instability, and corruption, which have severely stunted its economic growth. The DRC's infrastructure is underdeveloped, with roads, electricity, and water systems being either non-existent or in disrepair. Large portions of the population rely on subsistence farming for survival, and much of the agricultural output is consumed locally, limiting the potential for export. Despite efforts to address poverty and malnutrition, access to basic healthcare and education remains limited, with high infant mortality rates and low literacy levels. Additionally, ongoing regional conflicts, particularly in the east, have displaced millions of people, further exacerbating the country's challenges. 3. Central African Republic, CAR. The Central African Republic, CAR, is rich in natural resources such as diamonds, gold, and uranium, yet it remains one of the poorest countries globally. The country has been devastated by nearly 3 decades of civil conflict, which has not only disrupted the economy but also destroyed much of its infrastructure. Despite its mineral wealth, CAR struggles with political instability, corruption, and the presence of armed groups that control large portions of the country. These armed factions hinder economic development and the delivery of public services. Agriculture is the main source of livelihood for most citizens, but this sector is constrained by outdated farming techniques, low productivity, and a lack of infrastructure. The health system is extremely underdeveloped, with high rates of disease, including malaria, cholera, and HIV/AIDS. Furthermore, CAR ranks near the bottom in education indicators, with limited access to schooling and low literacy rates. The country is heavily reliant on foreign aid to meet basic needs, but the lack of governance and security challenges. 2. Burundi. Burundi, located in East Africa, is one of the most densely populated countries globally, and its population largely depends on subsistence agriculture. Political instability, ethnic conflict, and civil wars have deeply affected the country, particularly the devastating ethnic violence during the 1990s. Though Burundi is known for its fertile soil, the nation struggles with rapid population growth, deforestation, and soil erosion. The limited arable land exacerbates food insecurity, while the agricultural sector remains inefficient and vulnerable to climate change. Economic growth is minimal, with most of the population living below the poverty line. In addition to these challenges, political corruption and weak governance have hindered efforts to improve basic public services such as education and healthcare. The country faces high rates of malnutrition, especially among children, and access to clean water and sanitation remains a persistent challenge. Despite efforts to rebuild after years of conflict, Burundi remains one of the poorest nations in the world. 1. South Sudan. South Sudan is the world's youngest country, having gained independence from Sudan in 2011. Unfortunately, its birth as a nation has been marked by political instability and conflict. South Sudan's economy is heavily dependent on oil, which accounts for nearly 90% of its government revenue. Despite possessing vast reserves of oil, corruption, mismanagement, and political instability have hampered the potential for wealth distribution. The country has endured a devastating civil war that erupted in 2013 and lasted until 2018, displacing millions of people and further decimating the already fragile infrastructure. Agriculture, which is the main livelihood for most South Sudanese, suffers due to frequent climate shocks, such as flooding and droughts. Poverty is widespread, and education and healthcare systems are underfunded. South Sudan faces one of the highest mortality rates in the world, with diseases like malaria, cholera, and malnutrition being prevalent. As a result, the country relies heavily on international humanitarian aid to address its basic needs. These 10 countries illustrate the complex and multifaceted nature of global poverty. From political instability and corruption to climate change and underdeveloped infrastructure, each of these nations faces unique challenges that prevent them from breaking out of poverty. In many cases, external aid and international support are essential for addressing the humanitarian needs of these populations, but sustainable development requires strong governance, infrastructure improvements, and stability to unlock long-term progress.